This strange man with scissor hands. Because of the abnormal hands, eating is very difficult. In the eyes of everyone, he was like a monster. As a result, the next day, they discovered the power of scissor hands. He was cutting trees like crazy. Trees that were not worth much. They were turned into ornamental dinosaurs, and even cut out the appearance of a family of 4. Not only that, scissors hand can also cut vegetables. Can also be used as bamboo sticks to take barbecue. Just a little hands. If you have such a hand, what would you use to do? Neighbors came to see him. When he saw the shaggy dog, he couldn't help but trim its hair. The dog immediately became elegant and noble. Aunties lined up with their dogs in their arms. They asked him to fix the dog's hair. He cut the dog's hair. Soon he cut the same hairstyle as the owner. The woman looked dumbfounded. Suddenly a bold thought came to her mind.
Would you cut mine?
As a result, he stretched out his scissors hand and started to move the knife. With each cut, the hair flew around. The woman's face is full of enjoyment. In a few minutes, she had a stylish haircut.
That was the single most thrilling experience of my whole life.
From then on, Weirdo became a top barber. From cutting dog hair to cutting human hair, he attracted all the women of the town. It turns out the Weirdo's name is Edward. He was a robot made by a scientist. The scientist just wanted to put a pair of clever hands on him, but the scientist suddenly fell ill and died on the spot. Since then, Edward has been living alone in the old castle, a hideous scar on his face, the result of his many attempts to touch himself. One day Anna stumbled into the castle. She was instantly amazed by the sight before her. The greenery everywhere was so lifelike. It was like a paradise. It was so beautiful. Curious, Anna went into the attic. She saw a pale Edward with a pair of scissor hands. She was so scared that she backed up. She soon realized that he was harmless and had a timid face, just like a child who doesn't understand. So the kind-hearted Anna took him home. And Edward, stepping out of the castle for the first time, was curious about the outside world. Looking at the soft waterbed, he touched it with curiosity. Unexpectedly, that night, an accident changed his life. The woman was looking in the mirror, suddenly found a man in the bed. Edward took a sip of wine. The more he drank, the more he became addicted. Soon, Anna pulls and formally introduces her daughter to him. The drunken Edward raised his head. Shivering, he said hello. From that moment on, Edward fell in love with Annie. At dinner, he cut the steak. He carefully handed it to Annie to eat.
I'm sorry.
He also trimmed out the lovebirds to show Annie how much he loved her. But Annie already had a boyfriend, Jim. Looking at the intimate look between them, Edward's eyes were full of loss. Through the screen you can smell the smell of jealousy. That day the TV station interviewed Edward. When asked if he had a girlfriend, Edward looked at the screen with deep emotion, and Annie, in front of the TV, seemed to feel that he was about to say the name. Unexpectedly, Edward's scissor hand suddenly touched the wire. He was electrocuted and fainted on the spot. This caused Jim to laugh at him. Annie was speechless at Jim's reaction. At this point, she was worried about Edward. One day, Annie came home and forgot her keys. As a result, Edward used scissors to lightly pierce, easily opened the door lock. Jim took a look and had a bad idea. He quickly coaxed Annie. He asked Edward to help him break into his dad's garage, to steal the car and take Annie for a ride. Annie didn't want to say yes, but she couldn't resist Jim's persuasion. She dragged Edward straight to Jim's house. But when Edward unlocked the door and entered, suddenly set off a fierce alarm. Edward was locked in. Annie tried to rush in to save him, but Jim picked him up and ran away. Soon the police came to hear the news. Edward was arrested on the spot. He didn't say a word in the face of questioning, for fear of getting Annie involved. He took all the blame alone. Fortunately, the psychologist found that Edward's IQ was still in kindergarten. He did not have the ability to distinguish right from wrong. As a result, he was acquitted. The family, Annie, apologized to Edward, but Edward said,
I knew it was Jim's house.
Well, then why'd you do it?
Because you asked me to.
in the face of Edward's affection. Annie didn't know how to respond. What's worse is that the townspeople shunned Edward. In one night, Edward went from being the barber who was close to Auntie, to a villain who could cure children's nighttime crying. Even the family Christmas party. Not a single neighbor came to the Christmas party. At that moment, Annie suddenly heard a noise outside the house, so she quietly went out to check. Never snows in this town. but the man waved his scissors to make snowflakes for the woman he loves. Each snowflake is full of love. On this romantic Christmas Eve, Annie felt the ultimate happiness. She couldn't help but dance. Soon an angel ice sculpture was trimmed, but then a roar shattered the beautiful atmosphere. A frightened Edward cut Annie. Jim took the opportunity to say something mean to her. Edward was told to get out of town, and Annie saw how Jim was. He broke up with him on the spot. Edward left with a sense of anger and tore up his clothes, destroying his own work with his own hands. Angrily slashed the tires to vent his frustration, seeing that things were getting bigger and bigger. Soon the police arrived. He hid in Annie's house in a panic. Annie was touched by Edward's dedication, wanted him to hug himself. The scissor hand that was once capable of many things, but now he couldn't use it to hug his lover. He was afraid of hurting Annie. Finally chose to give up hugging, but Annie came forward to hug him. This makes Edward as a robot. First time to feel the warmth of love. At this time, Jim was furious. He drove the car all the way to the rampage. Seeing the boy in danger, Edward rushed to save him. As a result of panic, the boy was cut and injured. Neighbors came to hear the news. At once thought that Edward hurt the boy, and with Jim's incitement, they wanted to run Edward out of town. Edward had nowhere else to go. He was forced to flee back to the castle. Annie chose to trust her lover, rushing into the castle regardless. They were about to kiss. Here comes Jim again. He shot at Edward. By now he had lost his mind. He knocked Edward to the ground. Annie jumped to stop him, but was slapped and kicked away. At this moment Edward finally exploded. A scissors thrust through the window and pushed Jim down. People gathered around. Edward knew he was in a bad way, so he said goodbye to Annie for the last time.
Goodbye.
Annie kissed him affectionately. Then she turned around and grabbed a scissor hand and ran out to deceive the crowd. Edward was already dead when he fought with the public. Only then did the crowd turn around and leave. And at the end of the movie, Edward was left alone in the old castle, never to see his lover again. This is a sad and dark fairy tale. I hope the world is full of love and tolerance. I also hope that every weirdo can be treated tenderly. Follow me. See you next time.